Could Belarus become the next front? Ladies and gentlemen, over the past several weeks, speculation about the possibility of direct military confrontation between Ukraine and Belarus has intensified dramatically. Statements from Kyiv, statements from Minsk, warnings from Moscow, reports of military infrastructure, drone repeaters, border fortifications, road construction. Everything creates the impression that a new front could open at any moment. But is that really the case? Today, I propose that we separate emotion from military reality, because the real question is not whether tension exists. They clearly do. The real question is whether these tensions are likely to evolve into a full-scale interstate war. And my conclusion is more nuanced. The immediate probability of war has decreased. The long-term strategic probability remains uncomfortably high. The repeater crisis was more about politics than technology. The immediate crisis began after President Zelensky accused Belarus of hosting Russian drone communication repeaters and publicly demanded that Minsk dismantle them within 1 week. The ultimatum was unusually direct. Either Belarus removed them or Ukraine would do it itself. Several days later, Zelensky unexpectedly announced that the repeaters had already been switched off. Interestingly, Belarus never confirmed either their existence or their dismantling, nor has any independent verification appeared. This creates three possible explanations. The first, the repeaters existed and Minsk quietly removed them. The second, they never existed in the form described publicly. The third, and perhaps the most interesting, the entire episode was an information operation designed to create a crisis and then publicly announce its resolution, opening discrete communication channels between Kyiv and Minsk. Whether or not the repeaters were real is therefore less important than the political effect. The immediate crisis subsided, and that alone reduces the likelihood of Ukrainian strikes against Belarusian territory in the short term. But strategic tension has not disappeared. Yet beneath this temporary de-escalation, nothing fundamental has changed. Zelensky simultaneously stated that Belarus continued preparing military infrastructure near Ukraine. According to Kyiv, Belarus is expanding logistic corridors, ammunition depots, fuel storage, roads construction, military infrastructure opposite northern Ukraine. The roads mentioned Gomel-Chernigiv, Luninets-Svarny, Ivanovo-Malevich are not random civilian infrastructure. They correspond to operational military directions. Infrastructure, unlike political statements, is expensive. States rarely build military logistics they never intend to use. The question is not whether these roads will be used tomorrow. The question is whether they create military option for the future. And they clearly do. Why Belarus matters so much? Many observers underestimate Belarus. Strategically, that is a mistake. Geography remains one of the few permanent variables in international politics. Belarus offers Russia something no occupied Ukrainian territory can replace: the shortest operational approach to Kyiv, the shortest access toward Western Ukraine, and perhaps most importantly, the shortest road toward the Polish border, crossing through which the overwhelming majority of Western military assistance enters Ukraine. If Russia ever sought to disrupt NATO logistics without attacking NATO territory directly, Belarus would be a natural platform for this. This explains why Ukraine continues reinforcing its northern frontier despite the fighting being concentrated in the east and south. Why neither side wants war today? Paradoxically, both Kyiv and Minsk currently have strong incentives to avoid direct confrontation. Ukraine simply lacks surplus military capacity. Its best brigades remain tied down in Donbass and southern Ukraine. Opening another front along a border exceeding 1,084 kilometers would require enormous reserves that Kyiv simply does not possess. Ukraine faces similar, Belarus faces similar constraints. Its ground forces number only about 50,000 personnel. That is enough to defend the country. It is not enough to conduct a sustained offensive while simultaneously protecting Belarus itself. Furthermore, much of Belarus Soviet-era ammunition and equipment has already been transferred to Russia. From a purely military perspective, neither side appears capable of launching a successful large-scale invasion today. But there is also another factor, the Pripyat factor. Some analysts occasionally discuss hypothetical Ukrainian offensive operation into Belarus. On paper, one objective appears logical: advance toward the Pripyat River. Please look on the map. I'll try to show you. The red line is a Pripyat River, and the gray line, it's a border line between Ukraine and Belarus. If successful, Ukraine would gain a natural defensive barrier, shorten the front, and place the Mother oil refinery under direct military pressure. But military theory often collapses against logistics. Such an operation would require several assault brigades, heavy engineering assets, air defense, long supply lines, and occupation forces. Belarusian minefields, prepared bridge demolitions, Russian aviation, and Ukrainian shortage of armored equipment would likely transform such an operation into another resource-consuming campaign similar to Kursk. In other words, it is possible on paper, but highly unattractive in practice. Belarus is a strategic pressure platform. Perhaps the greatest danger is not invasion. It is permanent uncertainty. Russia and Belarus may never intend immediate offensive operations. They may simply wish to preserve the possibility. These forces, Ukraine, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and NATO, to keep troops, air defense systems, engineers, and logistics permanently deployed along the northern axis. This is classic strategic economy. Without firing a shot, Russia forces its opponents to disperse scarce resources. That alone creates military advantage. The shadow of anchorage also is very important. Another important variable lies outside Belarus entirely. The gradual collapse of informal anchorage understandings between Washington and Moscow has changed the strategic environment. Those arrangements, however controversial, created at least some framework for managing escalation. As they weaken, the conflict shifts toward what military theorists call total attritional warfare. Rear areas become targets, energy systems become targets, logistics become targets. Belarus inevitably becomes more vulnerable under such conditions because it remains Russia's principal strategic rear in the northern theater. But there is also another problem. I saw a lot of celebration of ending or weakening these anchorage understandings in Europe and in Ukraine also. But I think it could open the door for a new stage of escalation in Ukraine and Russian war. Because look, we had such a preliminary experience on such an issue, starting from 2014, when the agreements between the Minister of International Affairs of Poland, Germany, France, and the Ukrainian opposition and the Ukrainian president of Yanukovych, which was fully supported by Russians were destroyed. The Russian made the annexation of Crimea, and the Russians supported the separatism in Donbass region. Russia started the war, the first stage of the war against Ukraine. The second phase we saw when the Minsk's agreement also were disrupted. And after the Minsk process stopped, Russia started a new stage of escalation against Ukraine and made a full-scale invasion towards Ukraine. So after the stopping of diplomacy, after the stopping of the communication and some kind of agreements, relations, Russia every time goes to an upper stage of the escalation and conflict. And if there is a break between the United States and Russia in their dialogue about anchorage or something else, it would means also the new way of escalation, which highly hard to predict for now. It could be a new front line, it could be a nuclear weapon, it could be everything which Russia still has in its deploys. So we need to be very careful if it's such a things. But I want to continue about this Belarus case because it's very important for not only for Ukraine but also for entire Eastern Europe and not only Eastern Europe. Because Lukashenko's strategy, it's very interesting strategy. It's maximum support, minimum war, we can call it now. Alexander Lukashenko continues following a remarkably consistent strategy: support Russia politically, provide territory, provide logistics, provide training grounds, but avoid direct Belarusian participation in combat. His warning was revealing: if Belarus enters the war, the quality of the war will instantly change. This was not only rhetoric, it was a kind of Belarusian deterrence. Lukashenko understands something very well. Once Belarus officially becomes a belligerent, Ukraine gains legal, political, and military justification to strike Belarusian infrastructure directly. That would fundamentally alter Belarus' internal security and economic stability. And Lukashenko has spent 4 years, many years, trying precisely to avoid that outcome. What is the most likely scenario? What happens next? I think not invasion, but not peace also. Prolonged strategic pressure. Expect infrastructure construction, military exercises, intelligence operation, occasional drone incidents, political ultimatums, information warfare, and continuous reinforcement of the northern frontier. This is sufficient to tie down Ukrainian reserves. And from Moscow's perspective, that alone constitutes strategic success. Can Ukraine and Belarus go to war? Unfortunately, yes. The possibility exists. Will they? Not unless the broader Russia-Ukraine war enters an entirely new phase. Today, both Kyiv and Minsk appears to understand that opening another major front would benefit neither of them. But the strategic danger has not disappeared. As long as Russian forces remain stationed in Belarus, as long as military infrastructure continue expanding, as long as the wider war remains unresolved, the northern direction will remain one of the most dangerous fault lines in European security. The greatest mistake analysts can make is to confuse temporary de-escalation with lasting stability. The crisis has become quieter. It has not become smaller. And in geopolitics, those are two very different things. Thank you, friends, for watching this video. Please don't forget to subscribe for this channel. We are going to be back with the interviews and the questions and answers sessions. Thank you and see you again.